Welcome everyone, Costine here with a discussion about some of the best races in Total War Warhammer 3 from the perspective of their lord and hero choices. Not legendary lords and not legendary heroes, just the regular lords and regular heroes. Some people did say that the Lizardmen deserved a spot on this list. I think there is a fair argument to be made when it comes to the power of the heroes. Not necessarily the lords, I think they're kind of lackluster. They're decent but not great. But when it comes to heroes, the problem is availability, because it can be tricky in a Lizardman campaign to actually get access to all of them, as opposed to some other races like the Dark Elves here. Here it's turn 20 and I have access to every Lord and hero choice. This video was a lot more difficult to make than you might realize. I had to spend hours, I think a dozen hours in total, going through various races, various campaigns. And then I realized that I already had the High Elven campaign and a Dark Elf campaign already here that I could have just loaded up instead of having to play some turns as Alariel and Harganef. I figured Harganef would have given me a good choice because she does start with the Death Hag. But anyway, let's start with the Dark Elves. Now, the Dark Elves do have something very, very important going for them when it comes to their heroes, especially accessibility. They can get Masters at Tier 2, K-Knight Assassins and Death Hags at Tier 3, Sorceresses at Tier 3. And they can increase the capacity of those heroes as well at those tiers. This means in Dark Elven campaigns, you might have enough heroes to fill every army in your faction. In fact, you might make entire armies just purely based on heroes. They're not necessarily the best in terms of their combat ability, but they do add a good amount of value to the campaign situation. So, hero choices, let's look at the options. The K-Knight Assassin, he's pretty mediocre in a lot of ways. He does have the scavenge ability. He used to be really strong when it came to the slave economy, but nowadays it doesn't really matter all that much. But he still gives you that post-battle loot benefit. He can inspire fear, or he can do a good amount of weapon damage, or just discourage enemies. Also, you can get some significant benefits when it comes to assassination, though generally speaking, when it comes to heroes on the campaign map in Immortal Empires, it's not worth using them. Magic-wise, let's just go over that particular selection choices. You do have 5 magic schools. You have Beasts, you have Death, you have Dark, you have Fire, and you have Shadows. Out of these, just to go over it, I think Dark is pretty good, Death is pretty good, and Shadow is pretty good. Fire and Beast, well, Beast is not necessarily great. Fire is decent, but I do prefer the ones I mentioned. Now, Sorceresses, they're just magic users. There's nothing really special about them. They can ride a Dark Pegasus. They can get Winds of Magic benefit when it comes to them. And you can get quite a few of them. So you can have easy magic access in a campaign if you're playing as the Dark Elves. Now, when it comes to the Masters, decent melee combatants, they do have a mount choice going up to Dark Pegasus or the Cold One Chariot. They give you training. They give you control in a local province, which can be important for the Dark Elves, especially when they take over a province because of their slave mechanics. They get extra HP and they get a name of power that increases their own combat ability. So over here, this one has the Hand of Wrath. So he's getting Bloodlust, Charge Bonus, and Armor Piercing Damage. Now you can get something that's pretty mediocre, and I wouldn't say this one is really great, or you can get something amazing like Regeneration. That is pretty ridiculous. They're not necessarily really great in battles, but they can be pretty damn good and stand up on their own. And then finally, in terms of the hero choices, you get the Death Hags, pretty decent melee combatants, decently armored, pretty damn fast too. When it comes to battle, they can inspire fear, they can have a charge bonus, leadership bonus. I don't necessarily care much about the charge bonus on a hero that's largely either going to be on a cauldron or on the underground, but you can either get that or melee attack or witch brew. But of course, Rampage is not necessarily great to have. They do give you replenishment, which is always great to have. These heroes are essential because that replenishment, plus 17%, is pretty damn important for any faction. It really meshes well. Like, the Death Hags may not necessarily be the best combatants, but what they offer you on the campaign map is pretty damn important because of the replenishment. You already have units like Black Ark Corsairs that are heavily armored, so you can have a really good army as Dark Elves if you build it. That can do very well in Outresolve. This is important against garrisons because I'm sure a lot of us dislike having to deal with garrison battles. Now, in terms of their lord choices, they have the following decisions. They have the Supreme Sorceresses. So the Supreme Sorceresses are basically your regular mages with an extra skill, the Student of the Dark Tower over here. They can go with the Dark Pegasus. They can get and all the lords can get a Name of Power. So either combat skills, their army, or you can improve in which the lord's standing in the faction as well. So there's various benefits when it comes to a Name of Power over there, but I'll get into that in just a second. Then you have Beastmaster. I need to go to another province to recruit one. So you then have Beastmasters. Now, when it comes to Beastmasters, they're more of a late game lord choice. They don't necessarily have the best mount to the Manticore. It's decent enough, but it's no dragon. Same Names of Power benefit, decent melee ability. Not the greatest in the world, however, unfortunately, but they're really there to buff a monster army or cavalry army if you're going there. So you can buff Medusa, you can buff War Hydras, you can buff Black Dragons if you really want to go for it. So some significant monster benefits when it comes to these guys. Most of the time, though, I don't necessarily see a point in using them. Then you do have the Drellords and the Drellords with sword and shield, the female version, or the Drellords with sword and crossbow. But what is the difference between the two of them? Well, I already have one with sword and crossbow, so let's just go over it. They basically have the exact same skill line with one difference, which is, of course, that the sword and shield have strength for spite and the Kindle the Fury. This might be your better choice because as Dark Elves, you really want to make use of those Black Ark Corsairs. The male version, he gets the loose skill, which gives you a reload skill ability. So this can be useful for a ranged focused army. But pretty much the same skill line, with the exception of that. They both can get Black Dragon, so they both have a pretty substantial amount of combat ability, and you can improve it even further with Name of Power. So either Martial, Revered, or Aristocratic. Now, I generally prefer going with Aristocratic. Let me explain why this is. Because Aristocratic is either going to give you something like this, like income from selling buildings, control, or you can get them minus 30% upkeep for Dread Spears, Dark Shards, and Bleak Swords. Or you can get Black Ark Corsairs. It is RNG, which is annoying, but the power is there and certainly gives you variety when it comes to the kind of lords you'll have leading your armies. In general, Dread Lords will be the best lord choices that you're going to have, especially at the beginning of the campaign. Maybe you can get the mage lord very, very early in the campaign until you get those Tower of Sorceries, but still, mages will be very plentiful, and that is a huge benefit for the Dark Elves. I know people don't like the Dark Elves at the moment, the slave system, etc., but they have a lot going for them. Just having heroes available so quickly, and especially magic users available so quickly, does give them significant benefits throughout the course of their campaign. So that's why the Dark Elves are on this list, though they barely got any votes. So number 5 on this list. Or we have the Vampire Counts, which makes sense because the Vampire Counts are certainly a race focused on heroes and lords. And they do have some really great choices. In terms of heroes, starting with that, we do have the vampires, either Lord of Death or Lord of Shadows. But it's not really the magic that I would say sets the vampires apart. It's their sheer melee ability on a flying mount, which makes them incredible. These guys, these ladies, are incredibly potent on the battlefield. And because they're flying all over the place, they have a ridiculous level of power. They have replenishment, they can wound characters, they have magic, what you want to choose. I would probably recommend going with the melee skill tree first, because you want to get Impassioned, a bit of Wild-Eyed over there, going in Immortal Well, getting some armor over here. Kind of made a mistake over there with Leadership because you don't need it. Also the Hunger, because of the replenishment when you're in battle. Great deal of flexibility on the battlefield with the vampires, incredible power, and good magic choices. Then you have the Necromancers. The Necromancers are fairly easy to get. Let's talk a bit about vampires just for a second here. Most of the time, vampires can only be acquired at tier 4 unless you're playing Vlad or Isabella, who can get them from the very start of their campaign. So it is an issue for Manfred and Gorst to get vampires. It's not an issue for Vlad or Isabella. Well, also an issue for Kemmler as well. But incredibly powerful. Still can be limited, of course, because it's tier 4 only. At the same time, however, the vampire counts do have pretty solid growth throughout when it comes to their settlements. Looking at the situation, not necessarily the best growth, but between the commandments, the structures for themselves that also increase their necromancer capacity, there is quite a bit of growth there. Now, necromancers are very accessible in the campaign from tier 2 with the growth building, with your main growth building. The vampire counts certainly are a race that makes multiple uses from the same building. Now, they have the lore of vampire, so they're going to get a bunch of skills that help with regeneration, help with zombies, good amount of power, really a good support hero when it comes down to it. And then we move on to the White Kings. Pretty decent melee combatants. Don't hold a candle to the vampires, unfortunately. Don't have the same kind of flexibility, but do give you a training option with still a pretty decent mounted combatant that does have the heroic killing blow. No regeneration, unfortunately, when it comes to them. And then there are the Banshees. When it comes to the Banshees, I'm not sure what to think of them. I think the only reason you'd really bother with them was for the movement range and additional growth if you want it. I mean, they have a decent amount of durability because they're obviously ethereal, but yeah, they don't hold a candle to the other melee choices. They don't necessarily have the stats to be as effective in battle as the other ones, but still, mobility is always a very, very powerful skill. And if you have a hero that gives you mobility, you generally take that hero because it really helps you out in your campaign. Now let's talk about the hero choices. Now you have two ways of getting heroes. You have the regular necromancers, and I'm just going to recruit one over here. So you have the regular necromancers. Now, the regular necromancers do have these two skills. They might seem useless as heroes, but as lords, but keep in mind there is a benefit with the master necromancers because they do get that casualty replenishment, they do get that upkeep benefit, they do get that raise dead cost. There's a reason why Gorst is really powerful, and it's not just because of all the zombie benefits. The raise dead cost that he and Kemmler have as necromancers is potentially, you can get it on these guys as well. And they're the cheapest lords by far when we're looking at recruitment options at only 850. Then you got the Strigoi Ghoul Kings and the Vampire Lords. But there's also the special options through all of the bloodlines. And really, you're going to want to get these bloodlines. The way these bloodlines work is you get a lord that's immortal from the very beginning that gets a special skill line. It's obviously not as good as a legendary lord, but it's still a special skill line. So what are the choices? You have Blood Dragon, Von Karstein, Lamian, Necrarch, and Strigoi. What are the differences? Now, generally speaking with these guys, you're generally going to want to get the benefits that these guys provide. So you might want to get the diplomatic relations benefit if you're playing as Vlad or Isabella or any of them really. Unless you're talking about Ghost, you may want to get this 30 diplomatic relations benefit in your campaign pretty quickly because it will really, really help your campaign out, especially because a lot of people hate the vampires. But let's take it in order. Let's start with the Blood Dragon over here. The Blood Dragon, pretty good melee combatant, of course, does have the lore of vampires as well when it comes to it, or rather a modified version of it, but still, lore of vampires, decent melee combatant. What really sets the Blood Dragon apart, though, is their choice of a special skill line. So they can go all the way to a zombie dragon when it comes to mount choices, but they have some substantial power when it comes down to it. Because you can either go for a choice that gives you a minus 50% upkeep benefit for Black Knights, which is pretty great. I believe the Red Duke gets it for Blood Dragons, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong. And or a choice of minus 40% upkeep for Graveguard. Both of these are pretty good choices. I personally think the Graveguard one is generally the one you're going to want to go for. But still, being able to maintain Graveguard for minus 40% upkeep is actually pretty damn substantial. Because if we look at the Graveguard, they're 230, so you're almost cutting that in half, making them really damn cheap. And that is pretty great and very important. because money can be something of an issue in a Vampire Counts campaign, at least early on, right? When you're maintaining a lot of armies. Once you get to tier 3 in settlements, it isn't so much of an issue. But early on, especially when you're raising the dead and you're getting armies like this in 25 turns of your campaign, yeah, you can be damn certain it is an issue. I've kind of pushed myself to the brink of bankruptcy here, but that's because I have a lot of lords recruited for the purpose of this video. Then we get the Von Karstein choice. The Von Karstein choice gives you obviously Sylvanian Crossbowman and Handgunner, so that's his special skill line. He does have a better magical tree than the Blood Dragon. Pretty good melee tree, still a zombie dragon. You get benefits to Fellbats when it comes to upkeep. Benefits to Direwolves, benefits to Vargeists, and a 40% upkeep benefit to Vargeists, which is pretty great because Vargeists are pretty decent units, and benefits to Sylvanian Crossbowmen and Handgunners. You also get an additional Sylvanian Crossbowmen, so you can recruit more of them with the Von Karstein Lords during the course of your campaign. So here I have 2 available in this particular campaign. Then there is the Lamian over here. Lamian is kind of lackluster, if I'm being perfectly honest. I mean, yes, you want them for the diplomatic benefit, the character experience, but I gotta say, when it comes to their skill line, there's kind of lackluster. Still a great deal of flexibility on the battlefield because they're basically vampire lords, more or less. So hunger. They do have a great choice over here with construction time for Vampire Lair and construction cost, campaign line aside. They can also get that zombie dragon, of course. Queen Bee, not necessarily important. It used to be, but not really great. When it comes to their special skill line, it's just combat benefits, bonus versus infantry, perfect vigor, as well as a debuff. It's actually a pretty substantial debuff as a hex, but not as impressive as some of the other ones. Still is something you're going to want to get because the benefit here can be great if you're trying to engage in diplomacy. Then we're talking about the Necrarchs. So the Necrarchs, they've basically got this skill line that just gives them a bit of extra magical benefit. Again, not really special. You're more so getting that bloodline for the sake of the benefits you're getting here from Winds of Magic research, as well as upkeep at the highest level. But I would say they're not particularly great at all. Yes, you do get that Winds of Magic Power Reserve and Miscast Chance, Wild at Heart, Leeching, all that, but not too impressive when it comes to things otherwise. Like, I vastly prefer like the Blood Dragon or the Von Karstein Lords. And then finally the Strigoi. So the Strigoi, like the Blood Dragon, have a choice. So this choice really is going to come down to what kind of benefits you prefer in battle for the Strigoi himself. He's a really good combatant. He does have that. He does have various benefits for Crypt Ghouls and Crypt Horrors, like upkeep for Crypt Horrors, recruitment duration for them, leadership benefits, physical resistance, upkeep for Crypt Ghouls. So the Strigoi bloodline really makes those more effective, and you'll also, of course, get a Terrorgeist as a mount, which is always pretty damn substantial. Not necessarily the most impressive special skill line, unless, though, of course, you shouldn't discount these. So they're really focused on making those kind of units work when it comes to that. Still pretty solid magic choices all around. And that is the vampire counts. Really powerful heroes, really accessible heroes. Some of them are really accessible heroes when we're looking at it. Like Necromancers, very, very accessible. Others, not necessarily as much. So if you want to increase Banshee capacity, if you want to increase White King capacity, if you want to increase Vampire capacity, you're just going to need to go to tier 4. Though, again, this isn't necessarily a problem for the Vampire counts, who do have a fairly solid enough economy. Though you can go bankrupt if you're not careful, which, yeah, let's just say there were a bunch of questionable decisions I made during the course of this particular campaign. And certainly regretting that over here. And number 3, we have the High Elves available over here. Now, the High Elves have an influence system, which they can then spend on lords and heroes to get some really powerful variants that have various benefits. So, for instance, over here, I can recruit a prince that has unit experience gain per turn of 100 and 10% ammunition. Depends on the kind of level of influence that you're spending. Unfortunately, without influence, you're getting negative stats. So there's plus benefits and downsides when it comes to dealing with these guys. Pluses and minuses when it comes to the High Elves. But let's start with their hero choices, if I can find them on this campaign map. So first off, you get the Noble, the most basic hero that you're going to see the most often throughout the course of High Elven campaigns, unless you're playing as Alariel. Nobles have replenishment, they have various knowledges that give you different benefits, diplomatic benefits with High Elves, Bretonia, human factions, or lizardmen. They're pretty decent melee combatants. They have a chariot or a great eagle. I think the eagle is actually the better choice versus the chariot. And they have the entire melee skill line. And they can also secure your influence if you're targeting a settlement. Influence is obviously going to be a significant factor. They can also increase your trade in a particular province if you move them in it. This is how you can gain a lot of money. And they, like many other lords and heroes of the High Elves, they get the Spirit of Assyrian. So melee defense and speed, always nice to have with that. Then we have the Handmaidens. Now, Handmaidens are ridiculous. And this is one of the major benefits that Alariel has in her campaign, because you can get these at tier 3 as opposed to tier 4. So what do Handmaidens give you? They give replenishment, growth, a decent melee skill line, though they also have some ranged options. But here's the thing, you're pretty much never going to want to increase their ranged options because you want this particular skill line. This particular skill line is amazing and it makes them incredibly good in large numbers. So at Diplomatic of the Everqueen, you get 2 diplomatic relations with High Elves, but at Tactful, you get 2 diplomatic relations with all factions. That doesn't matter which one is, and it stacks. Then 5% income from trade tariffs, 1 influence per turn, and 1 control in all provinces for each of them. The more handmaidens you get, the more money you're going to have, the more influence you're going to have, the better your diplomatic relations, which actually do matter for the High Elves a great deal because of their reliance on trade to keep their economy going. Like, right now, it's pretty early in the campaign. I don't necessarily have as many trading partners as I could, but the more this campaign progresses, of course, I'm going to get more and more trading partners, and I still haven't really started getting elven embassies to really increase my trade income. But get those, it really becomes powerful. And then finally, we also have the lore masters of Hoeth, as well as the regular magic users. But lore masters of Hoeth, decent melee combatants with a magic tree as well. Though the magic tree in general is just focused on buffing their combat ability, more or less, or allies in range, in melee in particular. Like, so you get HP, you get some armor benefits, Spirit Leech, so some buffs, some debuffs. Not really too powerful in magic, but a bunch of buffs and debuffs. Pretty decent in combat, obviously not as maneuverable on the battlefield, and they also give you training. This one is the special one, Cavill. What about mage heroes? Well, I don't actually have one because there's nothing special about mage heroes. There are, compared to mage lords, there are a bunch of magical schools you have available as the High Elves over here, and it's the same between heroes and lords. Let's talk about archmages, princes, and princesses when it comes to the campaign situation. So starting with archmages, it doesn't matter which school of magic you choose, it might be a choice forced on you. In this case, this was the first lord beyond Alariel that I recruited in this campaign. The reason I went with her is because the negative trait she has is pretty much pointless, because recruitment duration plus 1 of her Phoenix units is unimportant. Not the best magic tree, but I did need a lord to lead an army. Now, here's the thing about archmages. They can go all the way to moon dragons. They get the speed of Assyrian. They get the greater ward skill, which gives them ward save. Generally, lords get missile resistance. Lords and heroes get missile resistance. Getting 10% ward save is actually pretty substantial. Then they'll have bound spell. They'll have cooldown to all spells. They can dedicate themselves to a particular god. I do find a dive to be great because of the income from sacking settlements, and of course then they have the entire magical skill tree. They get the looter skill, as well. Not necessarily the best melee combats, though they can hold their own, of course, because of the dragon, but they're lacking the melee skill line. Obviously, they're mainly here for magic. What is the best magic, you might ask? Good question. You're not necessarily going to be able to make that choice, but I do personally really like having high magic because you can get the Fiery Invocation, which I think is a magnificent spell. But it depends on the kind of effects, lord effects that they'll have. Typically, archmages and mages in general are going to focus on, obviously, magic and things along those lines, or effects that benefit your economy or construction cost and time in a particular province. So either some bound spells or incendiary or something like that. Then we have princes as well when we're talking about them. If I can find one, I thought I had one. Might have ended up losing it. Okay. There we go. So there's my prince. One's wondering where the hell he was. So, like what the archmages can dedicate yourself to a god, generally princes, when it comes to their skills, if we're looking at the choices here, generally they'll get skills that buff the army. So you can get some upkeep benefits, you can get like an ammunition benefit, unit experience benefit, leadership benefits, those kind of things, or just their own personal combat ability benefit. He, for instance, has depth 20% ammunition for units in the army, very important for a range-focused army like the High Elves. They can also ride griffins and sun dragons and star dragons. Great amount of power for them because of that. Then they have the entire melee skill line, and then they have something that is actually very important. They get the Merchant Lord skill. Now, Merchant Lord is going to give you 10% tradable resources produced faction-wide. Princes are amazing because of the skill, because the more trade resources you're producing, the more money you're making from trading resources. So over here, for instance, though bear in mind, you can certainly get to a point where you're not trading all the resources. Like over here, I'm only trading away 59% of the Elven chest with the faction I'm trading. But typically speaking, outside of the Elven chests, producing a lot of trade resources is a huge benefit to your economy. This is one of the bigger benefits for the High Elves. People are certainly abusing tradable resources in Warhammer 2, getting to ridiculous levels of income. You can still do so as the High Elves. I've had incomes of over 100k in High Elven campaigns that were not like turn to 100 or something like that. They were much earlier than that. Now, Dark Mages do have one bit of an advantage against the Princes. They get the loose skill. And then finally, as the final Lord choice, and the worst, as far as I see it, we get the Princesses. They still have the Merchant Lord skill. They do have loose, but their combat ability is weak because they're a ranged Lord. And ranged Lords just don't do so well. Well, they're a hybrid one, but they can get Star Dragons, but they're just not going to have the same kind of melee combat ability as Princes will do. And besides that, the thing about Princesses compared to Princes is that Princesses, the skills they have tend to focus on your range units for pretty obvious reasons. So either artillery or Illyrian Reavers. If you can get one that gives you an upkeep benefit on archers, that's great, but still, they don't hold a candle compared to the princes in just pure combat ability. They just don't have the same skill, though their army might be better in terms of a fight. Still, pretty decent choices, all a pretty decent choice. Not necessarily, not the one you want to go for. I'd say princes are the better one, but still, not completely horrible to have. And that's the High Elves. Great deal of power, scalability in their campaign with their lords and heroes. Vast array of magic with their archmages and regular mages. Just a good amount of power. Start pretty weak though, and they do have one major issue when it comes to their heroes: accessibility. A pretty important thing. Now, Alariel can increase handmaiden capacity at tier 3, but outside that, you do need tier 4 for pretty much everything. To pretty much increase any hero capacity, be it nobles, mages, lore masters of Hoeth, handmaidens, you're going to need tier 4, which is certainly a limiting factor. But that's the entire design of the race of the High Elves. It's certainly their main weakness when it comes to the campaign situation, that they do start slow, and they do grow to be far more powerful later on. And the problem with that in Warhammer 3 is that the campaign pretty much gets decided within the first 30 turns or so. If it's not decided by that point, well, you've got some serious issues on your hands. That's just how things are. So the High Elves do get ridiculously more powerful the more you play the campaign. Your income increases exponentially the more turns you go, the more trading partners you have, the more heroes and lords you have, but it does certainly start out very weak. And there are obviously limitations on the lords and heroes because of the influence system and because of the limitations on increased hero capacity. You do have good growth as the High Elves. Well, pretty decent growth anyway. You do have a commandment plus 20. You do have heroes that do give you growth, though. Pretty damn good growth when it comes down to it. So yeah, High Elves, pretty solid choice. Not necessarily the best in the early game, however. There's a reason why I do put the Dark Elves in a lot of these videos, because accessibility is a really important thing. It doesn't matter how good something is in isolation if you're not going to use it, and that's one of their main strengths. The High Elves are the exact opposite of that. They're not as accessible, but they certainly are far stronger the more you play their campaign. And number 2, we have the Skaven, and to be honest, I would consider the Skaven personally to be a very strong contender for the number 1 spot. People, however, voted another race to be on the number 1 spot, and I don't necessarily disagree with that decision either, but I certainly do value the situation that Skaven have in their campaigns when it comes to their lord and hero choices. They have a lot of hero choices. It is actually ridiculous, and they're pretty good. They do complement the playstyles that you can go for in a Skaven campaign. Because regardless of the playstyle you're going to go for as a Skaven, you have heroes and lords that will work well for those playstyles. Some better than others, of course, but they will function. Let's start with heroes. First off, we do have to talk about the chieftains. They're very easily accessible. They give you training. They have a pretty decent melee skill line. They do have a rat ogre as a mount, which is pretty damn crazy. It's good in sieges, it's good in open field battles. It's pretty decent melee combat, and they do have ridiculously good skill over here that gives you 5% ward save for the accompanying lord, turning already some very monstrous lords and legendary lords into absolute killing machines, and also giving them loyalty and buffing leadership as well. Then you get an ambush defense chance, verminous valor as well, which is a pretty decent skill, speed, and leadership. Then leadership are size. So pretty decent choice as the default one. Then the most common ones you're likely going to see are the assassins. They have replenishment. They're not really great in melee, though they can certainly hold their own. They're basically like the witch hunters of the Skaven, but they do have concealment bombs. Poison attacks, so they can certainly survive, but they're a bit vulnerable, but still relatively decent when it comes to that, and they can debuff lords and heroes. A solid choice. This replenishment especially helps the Skaven. Then we have the warlock engineers, which are hard to get because increasing their capacity is probably, I'll get into capacity in just a moment, but they do give you mobility. They do give you a significant number of range benefits, reload time reduction, ammunition, triangulation, ballistics calibration, ballistics instructor for range, doom rocket, and extra powder. So a huge amount of benefits when it comes to these guys, like just the range benefits alone. They also have magic with basically the skill of ruin, so a decent number of abilities over here when it comes to the warlock engineers. Then you also have the Eshin Sorcerer, which is basically Clan Eshin's magical user. As opposed to Plague Monks or Plague Priests, they get Eshin Sorcerers. Now, they have a fairly limited melee tree. They do get scouting, and they do have some magic that's more designed for support roles. They're basically a support hero. They have a decent amount of survivability. They give you unit experience per turn for armies in the local province for all the armies, so they can stack, get to a high level. Decent enough melee skill tree. Their magical skill gives units really good amounts of survivability. That kind of armor, like it's support magic, that's how you should view it. That kind of armor is ridiculous. So you can debuff enemies in range, all of them, by a fairly significant amount. You can buff your own units by a significant amount. You can give stock and unspotable. Really helps the sneaky playstyle when it comes to it. And they can also do some decent damage with like Black Whirlwind. So pretty solid choice of a hero. And then finally we get 2 more choices of heroes, because yeah, Skaven have a ridiculous amount. The alternative, the alternative to those Ashen sorcerers are the plague priests. So plague priests from the Pox Cauldron, and they have the lore of plague. Now these guys can ride the plague furnace. You can get a lot of these, by the way, because there's an ancillary that increases your capacity, so you're not even tied to structure. Their magic is decent. They have the entire melee skill line, so a decent survivability over there. Winds of magic. Though sadly enough, miscast chance is increased, not decreased with these guys. They got a bunch of debuffs, armor debuffs, poison debuffs, reducing vigor, summoning a unit of clan rats, and then going all the way to summoning a unit of plague monks, which is pretty damn substantial and a good amount of damage done there. And then finally, the last hero for the Skaven is the Packmaster. Now, the Packmaster, again, a decent melee combatant. Not the best, but still is capable of doing a decent amount of damage, surviving. Doesn't necessarily have the entire skill line, but does have Shock Collar, which gives a good amount of melee attack and leadership to allies in range. If a unit is a clan molder monster, so you need to... So these guys are buffing monsters. This is the thing that I'm talking about when I'm saying that the heroes really benefit different playstyles. Because Plague Priests benefit the Plague Monk playstyle. Packmasters benefit a monster playstyles. Assassins benefit the Assassin playstyle. Chieftains, the Clan Rat, can work well in the Clan Rat situation because of the leadership benefit. So it really ends up meshing very, very, very well together. And obviously the Warlock Engineers benefit the artillery doom stack that the Skaven have. So these guys give you an upkeep benefit for the monstrous units, recruit benefit, casualty replenishment, leadership, and a choice between either getting wound and hero action cost or replenishing troops and reducing enemy casualty replenishment for enemies. How much that would matter on a legendary difficulty is hard to say. They can ride Brood Horrors, they can summon Wolf Rats, and Wolf Rats with poison. Overall, really solid hero choices for the Skaven. Now, it's hard to talk about hero capacity for the Skaven. On one hand, you have a lot of heroes, so actually getting all of them is something of a nuisance. On the other hand, Skaven can get tier 5 settlements very quickly in their campaign, so they're not restricted when it comes down to it. As long as you have food. For instance, in this campaign, over here, I'm pretty much at the food cap. I actually need to increase it over here. Overall, it isn't too hard to increase hero capacity for Assassins and Chieftains. You just need tier 2 settlements. Packmasters as well, get it at tier 3. And Plague Priests, you'll always get a lot of them because the ancillary will increase that hero capacity. But otherwise, you need a tier 4 settlement. But again, you do have an ancillary that can increase you. And you might have a lot of these guys running around. What about Ashen Sorcerers? Well... And fun fact, you can increase the... Though I think this is for Clan Ashen only, maybe? Not entirely certain. I generally don't use Plague Priests because I don't really need them. That's the thing about the Skaven. Like, dependent on what you're using in a campaign, you may not care about some heroes. Like, I don't care about Plague Priests. Ashen Sorcerers are also not necessarily too important, or Packmasters on my to-do list. The one hero, however, that every Skaven playstyle can benefit from is the Warlock Engineer. Unfortunately, they're the ones that are the most limited. You need a tier 5 settlement in order to increase their hero capacity, or you need to use a right that, for instance, Clan Ashen doesn't have because it's replaced by the Revitalizing Scheme, I believe it is. That replaces it, that would put a Warlock Engineer lab in an undercity. You can't get that as Clan Ashen, Bill of Lamentation. Otherwise, you need tier 5 settlements to increase capacity, so they are obviously going to be fairly limited in a campaign. Okay, so those are the hero choices, really strong choices, really complementary playstyles over there. What about the lore choices? Well, we have 4 choices: Grey Seers, Master Assassins, Warlock Masters, and Warlords. Let's go over them. So, the Warlord, pretty decent choice. Not necessarily the best, though. Not necessarily the one I'd recommend. They do get a choice over here of special skill line. They can ride Brood Horrors. They have the entire melee skill line. Pretty decent power when it comes to their battle prowess, but not necessarily something extraordinarily strong. Pretty good in a straight-up melee fight, however, it shouldn't be underestimated. They can get a significant upkeep benefit for Skaven slaves, armor for them, casualty replenishment, or they can get ambush success chance benefit. Always important, by the way, to get an ambush success chance for Lords and Skaven, because you can always ambush enemies, as well as giving you a benefit to assassination on local region and hero action cost reduction. Or you can get the 2 growth in all provinces and income from selling buildings faction-wide. This obviously can stack, can become pretty ridiculous, but Warlords are kind of the worst lore choice for the Skaven. There are just better ones. They'll get the job done. They're not horrible, but they're just the worst of the bunch. Then you have the Warlock Master choice for the Skaven. The Warlock Masters, they do have some melee skills, but they're mainly a caster lord, or really a support lord. But still, they have Arcane Conduing, Magical Reserve, Erding. Basically, they have the entire skill of Ruin. They do have a decent amount of survivability, and they can ride Doomwheel. Though, to be very clear, this isn't recommended. Go with the Doomflayer is the better choice most of the time, because Doomwheels can take a lot of damage and auto resolve. I'm not sure if that's been fixed. They get the cooldown to all spells, casualty replenishment to the Lord's armies, and then they get the choice between recruitment duration and recruit rank for Doomflayers, upkeep for Jezzails, Railing Gunners, and War Fire Throwers, or construction cost for all buildings. I'd say these 2 skills are the ones worth it. Doomflayers and Doomwheels just not really worth investing this point in, when these 2 can be much more useful in a campaign. Moving on, we have the Master Assassins. And I'd say of the lore choices, this is actually the one that's the best. The one that you're going to get the most use out of. The reason they're the best is because the best Skaven playstyle, well, this is the best Skaven army, or a variation of it. Gutter Runners, Slingers, Gutter Runners, Death Runners, later on Night Runners with Slings. And Master Assassins buff this playstyle by quite a bit. They are a hybrid here, a Lord, so they're obviously going to be limited in terms of their own combat ability, but it doesn't matter. They get the hit point benefit, they get the 15% ambush success chance benefit, some benefits in terms of their speed and missile strength, but what's really important is what they get for these other skills. So they get concealment bombs for Night Runners and Gutter Runner units in their entire army, and they get 10% missile strength for those Night Runners and Gutter Runners. And then they get Crackle Bomb. So a really good amount of range power. These guys really buff their army in a significant way. May not be the best combatants themselves, but the army they have is a skirmisher army. This is basically the Skaven meta at the moment, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, some artillery wouldn't go amiss, like this army overall would be a better choice. Or this actually was the main army I was using with Snitch before I sent them on missions. So this one is really the one that works the best. And then you have the Grey Seers. The Grey Seers, they aren't really that great from a lot of perspectives, but they do offer you one substantial benefit. They have a limited melee skill line. They do have a magical skill line, but it's not really the most important thing. They do get the Screaming Bell, which is pretty decent in battle, a lot of HP, though obviously you're losing quite a bit of weapon strength, but still a very good amount of survivability when it comes to that. But it's not those reasons you'd bother with Grey Seers ever in a campaign. It's rather this benefit over here. There's a lot of Skaven legendary lords on the campaign map, and it can be difficult maintaining diplomatic relations with all of them. So having a lord choice that gives you 10 diplomatic relations with all Skaven can really help you out when it comes to confederations. Especially if you're playing Clan Eshin, because you have contacts with the other major Skaven factions. In this case, I only have Clan Mulder and Clan Mars, and you can see that I'm already working on getting dealings with both of them, eventually hopefully leading to confederations. So Graciers, that's their main purpose if you're going to use them in a campaign. They're the least useful in a lot of ways, though. I'd vastly prefer to use Master Assassin or a Warlock Master or a Skaven Warlord. Still, great choices, highly versatile. Most of them fairly accessible, with the exception of the Warlock Engineers, which unfortunately are also the best heroes you do have in your campaign. Finally, and number 1, we of course have the Warriors of Chaos. You might be wondering about the Greenskins or some other races. Well, I gotta say, the Greenskins, while they have great hero choices, they don't have great lore choices, so that certainly eliminate them from the list. But anyway, with Warriors of Chaos, you have the following situation. You only have 2 lore choices, 2 hero choices. So you have a melee hero and the exalted hero. Can be a bit tricky to increase the capacity of these guys, because if we look at Dark Fortress and we look at what it takes to increase hero capacity for exalted heroes, you need this building. Now, it's not unavailable. You can get it pretty quickly. The problem is you don't have the slots for it, because you always want to get growth through the Corpse Mound. You always want to get the raid trophies for income, so you're not going to go for that. You're going to go for the cash shrine, for the income, for favor, so exalted heroes can fall behind. But that's a choice. If you want to increase the capacity, it is available pretty damn quickly in a campaign. So exalted heroes, pretty decent melee combatants, can get the cast chariot into a manticore, so pretty decent melee ability over there. Have the entire melee skill line, and then have 2 special skills, though you have to decide what you're going to go for. It comes down to, do you buff your army or do you buff yourself? So you can buff your units in battle. You can buff them on the campaign map for training and casualty replenishment, which is what I generally choose, or you can get the melee attack benefit here. Then you can either get magical attacks or leadership aura, or 10 armor and undivided authority, which is typically what I'm going for personally, because they do a decent amount of damage anyway, so increasing their armor is the better choice. And then, of course, when we're looking at the Chaos Lord, they're just basically the Lord version of that. They do have Skull Crusher and Chaos Marked. So Skull Crusher gives you a bunch of, like, basically these skills give you a bunch of combat benefits when it comes down to it. Melee attack, heroic killing blow, physical resistance for Chaos Warriors, Chaos Knights, and chosen units. So really good amount of power, going all the way into a Chaos Dragon, which is pretty damn good. Then armor piercing, undivided authority, physical resistance, and of course a charge bonus with missile resistance for the entire army for these fellows right here. Now, mage-wise, when we're looking at mages, which are going to be, you're going to have plenty of mages if you're playing Warriors of Chaos. You got 4 magic choices. You have metal, fire, death, and shadow. I prefer metal or shadow in my campaign, though certainly death and fire are nothing to sneeze at. Death in particular is pretty solid. When we're looking at the cast sorcerers with metal, we get the choice of either getting HP and spell resistance with a miscast chance benefit. These guys, by the way, can ride all the way to a manticore, cooldown to spells, or some melee benefits. And then they can also get magical attacks, leadership aura, or the armor benefit as well, with the entirety of the magical skill tree, and of course scouting. The cast sorcerer lords, the way they work is they have these skills over here: Winds of Magic, melee attack for Forsaken, Cast Bind, and Cast Feral Manticore units. Then, of course, armor, undivided authority, or just authority in general, physical resistance. Now, this might not seem all that special, and on the surface level, it isn't, until you go into the Path of Glory, and then you start looking at the various other benefits that they can get in battles, which can be pretty damn substantial when we're talking about both lords and heroes. So this guy, for instance, has Eldritch Aura, which gives missile resistance and spell resistance to all allies in that 30-meter range. Or you can, and I can even get minus 50% vigor loss reduction for chosen units. And also, crucially, I can dedicate these lords and heroes to a particular god. For exalted heroes and Chaos Lords, it's either Khorne or Slaanesh. When we're talking about that, well, actually, it's a bit different. It's a bit of a complicated mess. So it depends on who you have, who you're worshiping, who you're playing, really. But you can dedicate them to a particular god. I'm not gonna go into like who has which god. I think I would go a bit insane. But you do get various benefits. And the higher the level before you dedicate, you devote yourself to a particular god, the cheaper it's going to get. So you don't want to do this instantly. It's a bit annoying in the campaign map that they actually consistently bother you with this the moment they can do it. Crucially for lords, they can become demon princes. And they're the better demon princes. Oh, poor Daniel. Poor Daniel, the worthless Daniel. Actually, he's kind of going to get wiped out by my Malice Darkblade over here in this particular campaign. So yeah, poor dead, worthless Daniel. Because the Demon Prince, the Undivided Demon Prince, is actually better than Daniel because you can equip items, so Armors of Destiny, proper items, a better skill line, lots of things to like about that. You can also, of course, devote yourself to a god before going with the Demon Prince path. So devotion, the way it works, let's just go with this one. It's going to give you a bunch of benefits when it comes down to it, because you get the mark of that particular god. So spell resistance, reduced melee defense, and get the frenzy ability in this particular case. It may change your skill line a bit, though in a lot of ways it's substantially going to stay the same. So there might be some skill line changes depending on what god you're going for. Like over here with the Exalted Hero Khorne, I lose the armor, but I get Khorne Authority. I can get ward save, spell resistance, and then of course weapon strength with the Hellblade. Those are my choices. And I get some different Juggernaut as a mount choice as well over there. So quite a high degree of customization over there when we're talking about the Chaos Warriors. That's the thing. There's only 2 hero choices, or only 2 lord choices, but they're very highly customizable between like the boons of chaos as well as the devotion to particular gods. That's the thing about Warriors of Chaos. They have a great deal of customization when it comes to their armies, when it comes to their lords, when it comes to their heroes. And that's what makes them great. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.